Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Wednesday. I think about what day. I'm thinking Tuesday. No, that's not right. Thursday. We're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and running a business, and building wealth and all of the financial aspects of life. So today is our monthly economic echoes, where we take a look at the economic data for the past month and see what that means about the decisions we make for our families and ourselves. So this is always a busy presentation, so I'm gonna jump right into things, and with where we always start, which is with a look at the consumer price index. Let's maximize this window so you can see it. There we go. And okay, so as we look at this, we can see that on all major categories, the consumer price index for all urban consumers, this is for the entire country, it went up 0.2% in April and 2.3% year over year. So we're edging closer to the Federal Reserve's target of 2%, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, and then if we look at uh, all items less food and energy, which are the two most volatile, we see that's actually at 2.8%, okay, year over year. Also a 0.2% increase. Now, why is it not, if it was a 2% increase in April, why is it not 2.4% year over year? And that's because it varies month by month, and so there were evidently some months on average that were higher than 0.2%. So it's running between 0.2 and 0.25% each month over the last year. So again, a little bit higher than the 2% average. However, what's more important is food, which is a category that everybody buys, is up 2.8% year over year, whereas energy is down 3.7%. So although not everybody literally uses energy in the sense of drives a car and buys gasoline, energy is a component of everything we buy. And so what's really going on here is continuing drop in the price of energy is holding down the overall inflation rate. So if energy prices taper off or start to increase, then we would see inflation, I think, start rising again. I think this is one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve decided to leave interest rates unchanged, because there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and it's difficult to predict whether inflation is going to continue to drop down to the 2% target, whether energy prices are going to continue to decline. Now, I will say that the bias is for energy prices to continue declining. There have been some production increases out of OPEC. At the same time, as Vladimir Putin remains intransigent in negotiating or agreeing to a ceasefire in the war in Ukraine, there is a substantial movement in Congress to sanction Russia, and that would the part of that would be an attempt to pull Russian oil off of the market. So if Russian oil exports decline, that would shrink the supply of energy, it's the supply of oil, which again could cause oil prices and energy prices in general to taper off instead of decline, and or even increase. And so because of all of these various uncertainties, this is why I think that interest rates have been held steady last month, and we're in kind of a wait and see pattern here. Okay, so now let's look at how these categories break down. Okay, so food at home was up about 2%. Food away from home up almost 4%, 3.9%. Okay, food at home. Once again, we see the big increases among proteins, meat, poultry, fish, and eggs up 7%, and non-alcoholic beverages were up 3.2%. Those were the big gainers. Cereals and bakery products unchanged. Dairy was up 1.6%, whereas fruits and vegetables were down almost 1%. And other food at home was up 0.7%. So, if you're like me and you eat a diet heavy in fruits and vegetables, the picture is looking a little bit brighter. But if you eat a heavy protein diet, so then your costs have continued to increase. Okay, energy. So, as has been the trend for months now, energy commodities decreased 11.5%, right? So, if you notice, I'm going to go back to the top level. Overall, energy went down 3.7%, but this is because energy commodities went down 11.5%, but energy services went up 6.2%. So, services continue to increase while commodity prices drop. What are commodities? Well, fuel oil for heating went down almost 10%. Gasoline went down almost 12%. Okay, so if you're driving, presumably you should be seeing prices at the pump drop, unless you're here in California. California has a specially formulated gasoline that is supposed to reduce air pollution. We can't import gasoline from other states, and our refining capacity has continued to decline over the years. And so gasoline prices are much stickier in California. But in the rest of the country, I would imagine you're seeing some pretty good drops in gasoline prices. Okay, energy services. So electricity went up 3.6%, a pretty significant increase. Natural gas went up 15.7%, right? So if you don't drive, but you do heat your home with natural gas, or maybe you have a gas stove, a gas dryer, a gas cooktop, you experienced energy price increases much steeper. And so you're feeling inflation more than people who don't have the same kind of appliances. Okay, and then in all items less food and energy, commodity prices basically unchanged, up 0.1%. Services less energy services went up 3.6%. Okay, so let's drill down to commodities. What really went up? Well, tobacco went up 7.1%. Alcoholic beverages just under 2%. Medical commodities 1%. Used cars and trucks 1.5%. New vehicles essentially unchanged, 0.3%, and apparel again went down. I think it went down last month as well, almost 1%. Okay, so you can see the big increases in commodities, not including food and energy commodities, are tobacco and alcoholic beverages less than 2%. So really, tobacco is the big gainer there. Okay, in terms of services less energy services, so shelter went up 4%, medical care over 3%, transportation services 2.5%. Okay, so everybody needs shelter, and most of us need medical care. Although, thank goodness I've been healthy so far this year, as opposed to the previous 2 years, and so haven't had to bear any medical care services. So, but shelter was up, as was the cost of gas, and food is also up. So if you're not smoking and if you're not smoking, okay, that would tend to lower inflation a little bit. But if you're not driving, if you don't drive a car, you're almost for sure experiencing inflation higher than what we're seeing in the national average. Okay, so now let's look at a local consumer price. Okay, we're going to look at Los Angeles. Okay, we're going to look at the local area here. Okay, and you can see that. So Los Angeles, okay, once again, consumer prices were up 3%, which is higher than the national average, okay, for the 12 months ending April. And items less food and energy were up 3.3%. So we're experiencing inflation higher than the country as a whole. Now, here's the important thing. The consumer price index, all urban consumers for Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, went up 0.6% in April. So inflation is definitely hotter in the Los Angeles area than it is in the nation as a whole. Okay, and what's driving this? Well, let's see. And here you go. Gasoline prices in LA were up 3.2%, even though they were down 11.5% nationally. I'm sorry. Wait, yeah, 1.6 month over month, right? They 1.6% month over the month, and sorry, the energy prices overall were up 1.6. Gasoline prices increased 3.2% for over last month. Overall, for the year, energy prices declined 3% and gasoline prices declined 9.2%. So you can see, even though gas prices year over year declined in Los Angeles, they declined less than other places in the country, and they are on the rise. And we see this, it seems like we see this as we head into every summer. Refineries have to go offline for maintenance, etc. And just as we hit the peak driving season of the summer, gasoline prices in California in general start to increase. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, the food index in April went up 0.6%, again, higher than the national average. But food at home declined 0.3%, led by lower prices for proteins, which went down 2.7%. Food away from home went up 1.5%. Okay, so the food in Los Angeles went up almost 4% year over year. Food at home went up 2.4%, with higher prices in 5 of 6 categories. Food away from home went up over 5%. Okay, so you can see California, Los Angeles in particular, a more expensive place to live, and a higher inflationary environment. Okay, now let's look at wages, right? So inflation is all good and well, but how we're experiencing it also depends on, are we making more money? And here we go. So you see real average hourly earnings were flat from March to April. So they did not change at all. And in fact, on a weekly basis, earnings actually went down. And so that has to do with rounding errors and that sort of thing. But prices are going up and wages are essentially flat. Okay. So and that's so you can see that average hourly earnings, which are not adjusted for inflation, went up 6 cents. So that's what, just let's see, that would be 10. So let's see, 1% would be 36 cents. So it went up 1/6%. Okay, which is essentially nothing. And hours worked have also stayed flat. That's another reason why we're not seeing wage increases on a weekly basis. So they've been pretty flat, or just at slightly over 34 hours a week. Okay, and here you can see real average hourly earnings unchanged. Real average weekly earnings down 0.1%. And average hourly earnings went up 0.2%. It's actually 0.16. but rounded off to 2%. But average weekly earnings really were, average hours weekly unchanged. Average weekly earnings, again, went up about 0.2%. So, we're at best keeping pace with inflation. However, and unfortunately, I don't have these numbers on a local basis, but for an area, I would be willing to bet that wages are not keeping pace with the higher inflation rate. Okay, so again, those two, inflation or the consumer price index and earnings, need to be looked at concurrently, because look, if inflation goes up 5%, but our earnings go up 10%, so it doesn't seem like inflation is affecting us, and it's really not, because the increase in our earnings is double the inflation rate. So we always need to look at those together. Okay, now let's look at the civilian labor force participation rate. Oh, wait a minute. Where's the unemployment rate? For some reason, did I skip that one? Okay, yeah. Okay, so before we let's look at the unemployment rate first. Okay, sorry about that. For some reason, I didn't bring that one up. Okay, civilian unemployment rate. Here we go. Okay, sorry about that. And I just want to make sure this is posting right for you. Yes, it is. Okay. All right. So the unemployment rate was up slightly in April to 4.2% from, oh no, I'm sorry. It was flat with March at 4.2% for both months. February was 4.1, December 4.1. So it's been slightly above 4%. You can see unemployment has been pretty stable since August of 2024. Okay, it goes down a tenth of a percent, up and down. That's what it's been doing. Okay, now if we go back to May of 2024, it was at 4%. So we can see for the last year nationwide, unemployment has been pretty steady at about 4 to 4.2%. So that's been very stable. Okay, for men 20 years and over, unemployment rate is 4% in April, up from 3.8%, and since May of last year it was at 3.8%. So, and it's been hovering between kind of 3.8 and 4.1%. So again, it's been pretty stable for men over 20 in the last year. For women, let's get rid of this one. So okay, there we go. So for women, unemployment rate in April, 3.7%, unchanged from March. And going back to May, it was 3.4%, and April's 3.5%. So, again, for women, the unemployment rate has been pretty stable between about 3.5 and 3.89, 3.9%. Okay, so for again, stable. Now let's look at 16 to 19-year-olds. So unemployment has been more volatile. In April, it was 12.9%, and that's down from 13.7% in March. February, it was 12.9, on par with what it is now. And then let's go back to April of last year, was about 11.8%. April this year, it's at 12.9%. So you can see a much larger fluctuation. Unemployment has been as high as 14.2% in August of last year, and as low as 11.8% in January. So, and that's not unusual. Unemployment among teenagers tends to vary more widely. Teenagers go to school, they're on summer vacation, they may get a job for a while, and then they may, just take time off to do nothing. So, and they're mostly, a seasonal workforce, and so their unemployment rate is more volatile. Okay, looking at the demographics then. So for white Americans, the unemployment rate in April was 3.8%, on par with February and March. I think it was 3.7. Yeah, but pretty similar. And then going back to April of last year was at 3.5. So it's been in the range of 3.5 to 3.8% for white Americans. Compare that with Black Americans. So it's in April was 6.3, up slightly from 6.2 last month, and it was 5.6% in April of last year. So you can see it's up 0.7% year over year. So Black Americans as a group are experiencing higher unemployment than for example, white Americans. Okay, now let's look at Asians. Okay, so Asian Americans, current unemployment rate is 3% for April. That's down from 3.5%. So a big decline for Asians. Okay, and looking year over year, it was at 2.9% for April. So it's interesting, 2.9% April of 2024, 3% April of 2025. The highest it got was 4.1%. So again, seeing more volatility in the unemployment rate for Asian Americans, but still at a pretty low level, 4%, between 3 and 4%, still very, very low. Okay, and then finally, for Hispanic Americans, so the unemployment rate in April, 5.2%, up 0.1% from March, and going back to April was at 4.8%. So again, we're seeing a range of about 4.8 to 5.2. What was this right here? Trying to get it. Yeah, 4.85. So a fairly narrow range for Hispanic Americans as well. So overall, though, unemployment is low across the board, with the exception of teenagers, where it's almost 13%. That's not unusual. And you can see, by the way, teenage unemployment rarely drops below 10%. Here's 9.8% back in March of 2023. But typically, it over the last 8 years, it's ranged between 10 and 15%, ignoring the spike during COVID, right? So that's pretty typical for teen unemployment, as opposed to men 20 years and older. You can see again, since for the last 8, actually almost the last 10 years, it's hovered in the low to high 4%, sometimes getting slightly below 4%. And for women, again, over the last 10 years, it's been pretty much under 5% that whole time, except for the COVID period. So the last 10 years have definitely been a period of low unemployment overall. Now, like with the CPI and wages, as I always mention, unemployment needs to be viewed along with labor force participation. Okay, so one reason that unemployment can go down is that people drop out of the job searching market. Okay, because the unemployment rate only takes into account people who are unemployed but looking for a job. So, and there's a technical definition for that we won't get into. So there's two things that can change the unemployment rate. One is the number of jobs available and the people getting those jobs, and the other is the number of people looking for jobs, right? So the labor force participation rate is examining the second of the two. So the labor force participation rate in April last month was 62.6%, up from 62.5. And if we go back to April of last year, it was 62.7. So the labor force participation rate has changed very little. 62.5, 62.4, between 62.4 and 62.7. It's changed 0.3%. Not a big change over the last year. However, let's go back 10 years. Okay, it was at that range, 62.4. But there were times, actually, over the last 10 years, except for during COVID, the labor force participation rate has been around 63% for the last 10 years. But you see, there's been a long-term decline in labor force participation rate starting 20 years ago when it was at 66%, and it was at that rate until the recession in 2008, 2009, and from there it steadily declined to now the sort of more normal rate is 63%. So 3% of the civilian labor force between 2005 and 2015 essentially permanently left the labor force. So overall, we have a smaller labor force today than we did 20 years ago. Since then, it's stayed pretty stable around 63%, sometimes getting, 62.5%. Okay. So as we think about unemployment over the last 10 years, labor force participation really hasn't been a big factor in changes in employment. On the other hand, unemployment has been pretty steady as well. Okay. So, that's somewhat good news for the economy, but it also is probably saying that there are persistent uh, open jobs that employers are not able to fill. Okay, and that's not good for the economy because that means there's production capacity, for example, that can't be met. There's demand for services that can't be met. What's going to happen with respect to that? Well, and I'm gonna go out of the sharing for just a moment. So what's going to happen when we see from 2005 to 2015, we saw a 3% permanent decrease in labor force participation. And then over the last 10 years, we've seen pretty steady labor force participation at around 63%, unemployment pretty steady between 4 and 5%, and yet we persistently see open jobs. What's going to happen? Employers, businesses are going to fill those jobs most likely with technology, right? That's the only choice they have. There aren't people to fill the jobs, and if the work needs to be done, they're going to look for technological solutions. So AI may fill some of those jobs. Now they won't literally fill the jobs, right? What they'll do is AI will increase the productivity of existing employees in such a way that they can get more done in the same time. Okay. And so then the need for those jobs will go away. All right. So a lot depends on where the shortages of workers are. And now it does appear that they're in things like construction trades, plumbing, electrical, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, right? There's persistent shortages. So is AI going to replace those people? No, it's not. There's no way to like set a computer in front of a broken pipe and say fix it. However, what AI can do is it can help a plumber be more efficient in perhaps detecting where leaks are, or in how long it takes to fix a particular leak or to set up a plumbing system. Because of the information that AI can produce and how quickly it can produce it, so the time the plumber spent doing research to be able to do a job is decreased, meaning the plumber can spend more time in the field actually doing the work. Plus, if he has his cell phone, which he almost for sure does, if something comes up and he needs to figure it out, he can go on an AI on his cell phone and get that information much more rapidly than he could looking into a manual or having to call up colleagues, maybe a more experienced colleague. How do I handle this particular situation, etc. So this trend we've seen over the last 10 years in a pretty consistent range of labor force participation and unemployment, and still insufficient workers, leads me to think that we are going to see those jobs, those persistent unfilled jobs, go away as as employers figure out ways to make their existing workforce more productive. Okay, so and by the way, to the extent that you're in a more information job, okay, so whether you're like a paralegal or some kind of researcher or you're doing some kind of writing, okay, those jobs are the most at risk for AI, because AI does those things extremely well. Okay, I was commenting to a friend of mine on Monday how amazingly productive ChatGPT makes me using a spreadsheet. Okay, so what I used to do when I first started in the real estate business back in 1986 or thereabouts, my boss would not need me in that job today. Not at all. He could do it. What sometimes would take me all day to do a spreadsheet with a 10-year spread of income and expenses on a property, he could probably do with an AI in 20 minutes, maybe less, especially if he already had the basic spreadsheet laid out. Okay, so the idea that I would have to be paid today 8 hours to do that spreadsheet, not a chance. Not a chance. Okay. So that's the kind of work that's likely to go away. And so, as you look at what your employment prospects are going forward, if you are not experimenting with AI in your area of expertise, how to use it, excuse me, if you are not experimenting with how to use AI, in particular large language models like ChatGPT or Claude, in your work, you are falling behind and you are putting yourself in danger of becoming obsolete. Okay, next we're going to look at employment by industry. Okay, as has been, oops, let me make sure I get this enlarged for you. There we go. Okay, as has been the case for a long time, the two of the largest increases in employment are private education and health services, okay, an increase in 70,000 jobs in April, and government, okay, an increase of 10,000 jobs. Now, transportation and warehousing saw a big bump, 29,000 jobs, probably due to the surge in imports that took place in anticipation of the tariffs, hitting in this month, and then 11,000 job increases in construction. Okay, now interesting enough, leisure and hospitality, 24,000 jobs, professional and business services up 17,000 jobs, and financial services up 14,000 jobs. So there's a lot of job growth in April, which is good. Others, you see there's a slight drop in other services, no increase in information, slight drop in utilities, a little bit of a drop in retail and manufacturing, and mining and logging a slight increase, right? So almost all all the major changes were gains, which is good. All right, so let's look at private education and health services. So private educational services, 11,500 jobs. Healthcare, 50,600 new jobs. And social assistance, 7,600 new jobs. Okay. So healthcare job increases are largely driven by government spending. Okay. So this has been the trend now for pretty much the last 4 years, where the biggest gains in jobs are coming through sectors that benefit from government spending. Okay. And let's look at government itself. Now, again, you saw federal workforce dropped 9,000 jobs. However, and by the way, but that still means there's almost 3 million people working for the federal government. Okay. But state governments hired 6,000 people, and they're employing 5,500,000, and local governments hired 13,000 people. their total employment is 15,000 people. So 15 and 5.5 is 20.5, and 23.5 million people basically work for the government. Okay, so that's roughly, I think, 15% or so of the workforce. Okay, so local government, both education and other local government services, about the same in each one. Okay, what dropped in the federal government? Well, uh, everything but the Postal Service. Okay, the Postal Service actually increased 200 jobs, but everything else dropped. Okay, that is part of what President Trump is seeking to do. And then in state government, so state government education, about 1,400 jobs. It was the other category, non-education jobs in state government, that went up. Okay, all right. Now, the other large gainers, transportation and warehousing. So you see warehousing and storage, almost 10,000 new jobs. Couriers and messengers, over 8,000. Air transportation, 3,000. Ground transportation, 2,000. Truck transportation, 1,400. Right. So all of these support activities, 2,500. So you can see all the categories, with the exception of water transportation, saw increases. Even rail transport saw 100 jobs. Okay, so that's where transportation and warehousing. Okay, that all, across all sectors. That's why you saw such big gains there. All right, now let's look at leisure and hospitality. So both arts and entertainment and recreation went up, but only by a small amount, 3,000. Accommodation and food went up by almost 21,000 jobs. So, and this has been the trend. So amusement, gambling, and recreation, that's where the job increases came, offset partly by museums and performing arts and spectator sports. Okay. And then looking at accommodation and food. So accommodations did increase 4,000 jobs, but it's food, 16,600 jobs. That's really where the big job growth was in terms of leisure and hospitality. Okay, professional and business services. So this is interesting. All three categories increased. Um, in professional, scientific, and technical services, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Architectural and engineering services increased 5,000 jobs as legal services were up and computer services went up, but accounting and tax preparation, specialized design services, scientific research and development, management scientific, and advertising and public relations all went down. So it's a mixed bag among professional, scientific, and technical services. The other part of that is administrative support and waste management. So both of those went up. So administrative and support went up 7,700. Waste management and remediation went up 4,000. Okay, and now let's look at financial activities. Both finance and insurance and real estate increased. Okay, and so insurance carriers and related activities went down slightly, but securities, commodity contracts, etc., went up. Credit intermediation, meaning people who arrange credit, went up, and banks were unchanged. And then we'll take a look at real estate. So all sectors, well, 2 out of 3 sectors of real estate went up. Real estate and rental and leasing services. Lessors of non-financial intangible assets. That's like, I'm not even sure what that is, but it was unchanged anyway. So, but basically, real estate was healthy last month. Okay, and I'm not going to look at any of the ones that dropped. They're all too small. Now let's look at the 12-month picture. Now, if you see, I'm gonna click it back so you can see what's changed, right? So what has changed from 1 month to 3 months? Well, manufacturing year over year declined 82,000 jobs. Okay. And professional and business activities went down 31,000 jobs year over year. Okay. Those are the two biggest changes. Yeah. And right. And so those are the two. Otherwise, the trends we're seeing in April of this year largely mirror the trends we've seen for the last year. Okay, now let's look at. Okay, let's look at housing prices now. Okay, so this is the California housing market. And you can see the median sales price in California, $856,000 as of April. Okay, and it's been in the 800 to 900,000 range for pretty much the last year. It dropped slightly below 800,000 back in January, but it's been in this range in the mid 8 to 900,000 range for, like I said, a year now. Okay. And the fastest growing California metropolitan areas, Sunnyvale, Encinitas, Torrance, Berkeley, Lodi. So, Rancho Mirage, Mission Viejo. So it's pretty much across the state. Okay. And the supply. So there's almost 100,000 homes for sale. There's a 3-month supply. Okay. And you can see the number of homes for sale has gone up. Well, it took a big dip between October and December, but let's come back up to where it's, closer to where it's been at for the last year. Okay. So, that's, it's interesting that it dips so much in the fall, and now it's gone back up. Not really sure. Typically, you would see. Well, right, yes, yeah. I'm sorry, that's correct. Because as people have gone back to school, they take their houses off the market. Okay, we see the same thing here, October to December in 2023, and probably So here's same thing in 2022, right? That's correct. Yes, sorry, had my thinking reversed. So in the fall, typically you see the number of homes on the market decline, and then it goes back up as we head into the summer selling season. Okay, so that's been a pretty typical trend. Homes sold above list price, 41.8%, down 7.4% from last year. So the market is cooling. Okay, homes sold with price drops, almost 30%, up almost 9%. Okay, so sale to list price, basically on average, homes are selling for the price at which they're listed. Okay, now I'm handling the sale of a home I'm not handling it, but I have an estate that I'm administrating where a home is being sold. The broker has the listing. He gave me his input on what he thought the house should list for, or would sell for, or what the market was indicating would sell for. We listed at that price. We got an offer at the list price, basically. And then over the succeeding 2 or 3 weeks, we got offers at the highest one is almost 100, I think it's $180,000 over list price. Okay, so it can be a difficult market to judge what's going on. Now, what you do see here is, in general, for the last, since September of last year, homes have been selling for around about 40% of homes have been selling over list price. Okay, whereas the number of homes selling with price drops has been increasing. Okay, it decreased for a while, but it's steadily increased since December, and now it's kind of above the normal trend line, which is around 25%. Okay, and so the sale to list price has been pretty consistent around 100% until you get back into April of 2022, where it was, maybe around 105, 106% of list price. Okay, so those are the long-term trends. Okay, and all right, now, by the way, you can find this data on Redfin for any market, not just California. So let's see if it'll give me let's look at Miami. Okay, Miami, Florida. Okay, there you go. All right, so in Miami, Florida, the median sales price is $675. Okay. Median days on market about 92 days. You can see unlike California, where it's been kind of within the range, you can see the long-term trend in Miami, Florida is up. So back 3 years ago, the median home price was under 600,000. Looks like it was at about, I would say, about 560, maybe 570. Now it's at 675. So it's gone up $100,000 in 3 years. That's a tremendous increase in median home price. Okay. And then looking at these, you can see sale to list price 94.4%, 6.1% sold above list price, almost 20% sold with price drops. Okay, I think I must have done that data backwards. Now, in general, people are moving to Miami still. Okay. Where are they moving from? Well, you can see here they're moving from New York, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Boston, Los Angeles, Chicago. Okay. Now, and if they're leaving Miami, where are they going? Well, they're staying primarily in Florida with this sort of weird thing where they're going to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Not sure why that's the case, but otherwise they're either staying in Florida or going to Texas or Oklahoma. Okay. So that's an interesting trend to note. Okay, let's look at one more market. I want to go down here. Okay, no, I did that right. Okay, all right. Let's look at Omaha, Nebraska. I think is the one I usually also look at. Kind of a smaller Midwestern. Omaha. There we go. Omaha, Nebraska. Okay. All right. Median sales price in Omaha, Nebraska, $280,000. And you can see that it's been between 260 and 280 for the last year. And in fact, really for the last 2 years, it's been in that 260 to 280 range, although for a short time it dropped slightly below it to maybe like 250. So it's been in the 250 to 280 range for, a good solid 2 years. And even back as far as July of 2022, it was at about 260. So Omaha is a much more stable market than, for example, Miami. Okay. Sale to list price, 99.4%. Almost 30% of homes sold above list price, but close to 40% sold with price drops. Okay. And then in terms of in-migration and out-migration, so people moving to Omaha, where are they coming from? Kansas City. And again, you see Washington, D.C., L.A., Denver, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, right? And if they're leaving Omaha, where are they going to? Well, Milwaukee, still in the Midwest. Des Moines, Madison, still in the Midwest. Florida, Cape Coral, Florida, sorry. Phoenix, Arizona, Sarasota. Here's that weird Minneapolis thing. Not sure why. So if people are leaving Omaha, they're leaving for 4 Florida destinations or staying in the Midwest. Even in this case, even in Minneapolis is still in the Midwest, right? So people are not leaving Omaha to go to the coast, but people are leaving the coast to go to Omaha. Okay. This is a great thing to take a look at if you're considering relocating and giving you a sense of what's going on in the housing market. Okay. Now let's look at rentals. Okay. So this is the Zillow rent comparison tool. And I'm going to look at this one right here. You can see these are, I think they're median rents. Yeah, these are median rents across the country. And you can see Miami, Florida, median rent is $3,000 above New York. Now, that's pretty interesting down there. Both New York and Miami are significantly above Los Angeles. San Diego is above Los Angeles, okay? And then you've got lower price markets, Dallas, Phoenix, Houston, Chicago, Atlanta, right? So let's take a look at these. Los Angeles, okay? And what you see in Los Angeles is a huge number of rental properties around the 13 to 1400 range. That's kind of strange. I'm not sure, frankly, what that's about. Uh, um, and the average rent price over time. So it took a drop in May of this year from over 2,700 to 2,300. It's got to be because of this surge in these $1,400 and $1,500 apartments. There must have been some large complex that opened up with moderate priced housing that caused this decline. Because otherwise, you see the rents in Los Angeles have been trending between 2,700 and 2,850 for the last year and a half. Okay, so that's an this drop is kind of an aberration. Okay, market temperature is cool. Okay, and okay, and you can see some of the areas in Beverly Hills, 4,000, Marina Del Rey, 4,500. View Park, Windsor Hills, 2,300, Ladera Heights, Culver City. So you can see some of the submarkets within Los Angeles. Okay, now let's go back to Miami. Okay, so Miami has seen a drop in rents this year versus last year. Last year, rents ranged from about 3,250 to as high as 3,300 for most of the year, and then around about October they started dropping, and now they for this year they've stayed in the range of 3,000 to 3,075. Okay, and again you see this thing, rental properties in the $1,400 to $1,500 range. There's been a big spike in them. I'm wondering if that's some sort of mistake in the website that's reporting these, because you can see it's an outlier compared to the others. But there is a lot of luxury rentals in Miami, which is one of the reasons why their average rent is so high. Okay, market temperature is warm. Okay, and you can see Kendall, Florida, down around 2,000. Glenvere Heights, 2,500. Westwood Lake, 3,500. Okay, let's look at one more market. Let's look at Omaha, since that's the other. Oops. Omaha, Nebraska. Okay, and there again, we've got, yeah, this has got to be, I think this is something wrong in the software. For some reason, it's reporting them high. Now, the interesting thing is, by having what appears to be a misreporting of $1,400 and $1,500 apartments in Omaha, it made the average rent higher than it has been historically. Well, I guess on par with what it was around since July of last year was around 1,500, where it's staying now. But prior to July of last year, it was down in the range of 1,275 to 1,375. Okay, that's so, or 1,400, I guess. So, that's a weird aberration. And the market temperature in Nebraska is cool, so good time to rent an apartment. So, if you are thinking of relocating, that's a great tool to use to figure out where would it might make sense for me to go. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at real quickly is the survey of consumers done by the University of Michigan, and you can see month over month and year over year change are all down. Consumer sentiment is down. People are not optimistic about the future. So, and interesting enough, you see this consumer sentiment was essentially unchanged this month, 50.8 to 52.2. It still went down almost 3%, inching down a scant 1.4 points for after 4 consecutive months of steep declines. Okay, sentiment is down now almost 30% since January. Okay, which is significant. Now, slight increases in sentiment this month for independents were offset by a 7% decline among Republicans. So Republicans have been much more bullish about what the administration is doing economically, and it looks like that is starting to waver. Okay, tariffs were spontaneously mentioned by nearly 3/4 of consumers, up from almost 60% in April. Okay, so uncertainty over trade policy is really what's roiling the consumer sentiment. Okay, so year ahead inflation expectations went up from 6.5% last month to 7.3%. In other words, people are expecting an inflation rate more than double the current inflation rate. Okay. And the rise was among both Democrats and Republicans. Okay. Long run inflation is expected to go from 4.4 to 4.6% in May. Okay. And this was, again, mostly due to Republicans being less certain or less optimistic about the kinds of policies that the administration is following. So, what is this telling us? Well, inflation is definitely uncertain, and it's being held down largely by drops in energy commodities. That's clear in the inflation data. So if you are not buying gasoline, you are experiencing inflation at a higher rate than what's being reported nationally. That's number one. Number two, long-term labor force participation and unemployment have been stable. Okay, we may not be literally at full employment, but we're pretty close. So overall, it seems like it's a pretty good time to be job hunting, although probably not a good time to just give up your job but it's a good time if you have a job to be looking for a better job. There are still lots of openings in many sectors, and you can see that sectors like professional services advanced this in April, whereas overall for the year they were down. So we're starting to see a turnaround there. Okay, construction still seems to be growing. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with transportation and warehousing services after the surge in April. And if you're working for a state or local government, it looks like you're in great shape. If you're working for the federal government, presumably we're going to see more shrinkage or more declines, I should say, in federal government employment. So, those are the things to look at employment wise. In terms of housing trends, it looks like across most sectors, we're not seeing big increases or decreases. It's hard to tell with that aberration in rentals in the Zillow data what's really going on there, but probably not. Like, there probably wasn't the big drop in Los Angeles that the data was reflecting this month. Probably those $1,400 and $1,500 apartments, that's probably a mistake in the website. Okay, and finally, overall, consumers are pessimistic about the future. They're anticipating more turmoil as the issue of tariffs get worked through, and they're expecting higher inflation. Neither which is particularly helpful for those of us who are raising families and have businesses, etc. So, what decisions do you make? Well, investment decisions are tough. There is still volatility in the market. I would say don't act with panic. Stay the course while the turmoil works itself through is probably a good policy. If you are dollar cost averaging your investments, probably continue to do that and get through this time. And the dollar cost averaging will largely work through the volatility. If you're unhappy in your work, it's probably a good time to be looking around, not necessarily to quit your job, but to be looking around and reaching out and making contacts and talking to friends and colleagues in your field, or if you want to go into another field, developing new contacts that can help you understand what the opportunities may be. So this is all by way of taking the actual economic data and applying it to your situation so you can make the right decisions for your family and yourself. That's what economic echoes are all about. And I'm going to continue to refine and add more sort of economic commentary as opposed to what I've done the last, I think I've been doing this for close to a year, where I just give you the data. I'm going to start digging into what the data means and how it might affect the decisions that you make in coming months. So would love to hear your comments about this show in particular, how I can make it more relevant and useful for you. So social media links will be in the show notes. And if you want to drop a comment in there, that would be great. And I would love to hear it. Positive, of course, is always welcome, but negative ones, criticisms, constructive criticism, most welcome, because I want to make this as relevant for you as possible. So that's our show for today. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. We're going to sit back and have a cocktail. We're going to have the Twain in honor of our subject, which is Mark Twain, one of the, if not the greatest American writer of all time. Mark Twain, of course, wrote so many wonderful books. Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, Pudd'nhead Wilson, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Innocents Abroad, and many others. One of the great humorists of all time, certainly. And as a way into understanding and realizing the benefits of great literature, Mark Twain is among, if not the most, accessible. And so join me tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time at Jiggers' Place for a cocktail and a schmooze, and we'll talk about the wonderful Mark Twain. Next week, on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, it's Memorial Day. There'll be a special edition of the Way to Wow shows for Memorial Day. And then on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And then a week from today, I'll be back for the next edition of People Making Money. So as always, thank you for joining me, especially my live viewers. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.